Grace to you and peace from the one who knows when your life began and who was there, will be there when your life comes to an end. Today's service of worship is a little bit different than some of our other services because not only is this Back to Church Sunday, but it's also our Family Worship Sunday. This year, we're going to be having our Family Worship Sundays on the last Sunday of every month. And we're going to be using a order of worship that hopefully is a little bit more family-friendly, similar to the ones that we've used last year. I want to point out before I go any further that we are extremely blessed here at Christ the King to have a dedicated team of people who put a lot of effort into making these services work. When Debbie and the two Heathers and Brian and Kim sit down to plan these services, I can feel the creative power of God's Spirit stirring their imagination and strengthening their skills. With Christina's bulletin cover, the themes of worship, the songs we sing, and the visual images we use, with the children's object lessons, all of this stuff these are all gifts that these folks offer in the service of God and for those who gather here on Sunday morning. So thank you to the family worship team, and of course, thanks be to God. This fall, we are beginning a new series of worship events built around the theme, I Choose. Today we're going to talk about choosing God's love. In coming weeks and months, we'll be talking about things as choosing Jesus as Lord, about choosing to love, about choosing God's Word, about choosing to forgive, among others. Now, in order to give credit where credit is due, I also need to let you know that this series of services is inspired by a series of sermons preached by a fellow named James MacDonald. It seems that when God calls us to work in His vineyard, we never work alone. Enough of a preamble, enough credits. Now let's start talking about choosing. Us humans have a hard time sometimes taking responsibility for the choices that we make, especially when those choices cause us trouble. Take, for instance, recently a man who returned to his car over at the parking lot in Pickering Town Center, and he found a handwritten note stuck under the windshield wiper. The note read as follows: I just smashed into your car. The people who witnessed this collision are watching me. They probably think that I'm writing down my name and address. I am not. They are wrong. End of note. Sometimes when we make wrong decisions or we get into trouble, our brains go into a default mode and we do whatever we can to try and go under the radar, to get away from dealing with the consequences of our actions. We say things like, well, it's really my father's fault that I don't have a better self-image. Or maybe you've heard this. Someone says, it was my fourth grade teacher who turned me off learning, and ever since then, I've never been any good at school. I see I struck a nerve there somewhere. Okay. Sometimes we even do this with organized religion, with the church. We blame the pastor from years ago for preaching scary sermons when we were little, and so we've never wanted to go back to church. Or we blame a critical member of the congregation for finding fault with us when we were a teenager, and so we base our decision on not to attend church on those things. Now, of course, all of these things are very real and need to be acknowledged as being destructive in life. But the fact remains that you and I alone are responsible for the decisions we make. We choose how we're going to spend our time on Sunday mornings. We choose how we're going to treat our neighbors. We choose whether or not to vote. We choose whether or not we're going to work hard at our assigned tasks. Some of us even choose whether or not we're going to support the Maple Leafs. One of the philosophies that's flitting around in our culture these days is the philosophy of what I call irresponsibility. The mantra for this philosophy goes something like, well, go with the flow, and everything will work all right in the end. So just chill out. Such a way of viewing life is destructive because it encourages us to disavow our freedom of choice. It denies the reality that ultimately you and I do have to make decisions. I'm reminded of a passage in the Old Testament in which Moses prepares the children of Israel to enter the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, with all sorts of opportunities. And Moses says to them, "Choose this day whom you will serve." And so, you and I must choose whom we will serve. We cannot avoid making choices in this life. We all must choose which gods we will serve in this life, what masters we will allow to have power over us. This morning, I want to encourage you to choose God. The God, the one revealed to us through creation, through the Bible, and through Jesus. The Bible is full of accounts of people who made good choices and people who made bad choices. Adam and Eve chose to eat the fruit that they had been warned not to touch, and as a result, they lost their place in paradise. Bad choice. Even when everyone laughed at him, Noah chose to believe that there would be a flood as God said, and so he and his family were saved, not to mention a whole bunch of animals. Jesus chose to be nailed to the cross so that all humankind might be freed from enslavement to the power of evil and death. Choose God. But more than that, choose God's love. James MacDonald, in the sermon he preached, says that us humans have created 4 different misunderstandings of God that are nothing more than reflections of our human nature. The first one is the one that he calls the gruff God. This is the God who always has an angry edge. You have to be careful around this God because this God is pretty touchy. This is the kind of God who always seems to get up on the wrong side of the bed. Don't rub this God the wrong way. Don't ask questions. Just keep your head down and do the best to stay on the good side of this gruff God. Next, we have another God we've created, a God that James MacDonald calls the game God. This kind of God, the game God, lays down the rules. This kind of God paints life in just 2 colors, black and white. Play by the rules and you'll go to heaven. Make a mistake, however, and the game's over. You lose. That's all there is to it. Strike out, you're finished. The third type of God that us humans have created is the guessing God. This is the kind of God that always keeps you in the dark. With this God, you're never quite sure where you stand. The guessing God isn't a mystery so much as an enigma. There's really no point in trying to get to know this kind of God because there's a good chance that you're going to get it wrong anyways. The last type of God that MacDonald says we've created is a God that he calls the genie God. You know, this is the kind of God who always pulls miracles off at the last minute. Us Christians, us modern-day Christians, seem to have fallen for this God pretty easily. This is the kind of God who writes stories that always end with a rainbow. This kind of God is the master magician. None of these gods, however, are biblical. We can't find proof for them in the Bible. What the Bible reveals to us is a God whose nature is love. Pure, unadulterated, 100% love. What does John 3:16 say? We've all heard it so often we take it for granted. God so loved the world that he gave. It doesn't say God so loved the world that he took. It doesn't say God so loved the world that he left it alone. It doesn't say God so loved the world that he started destroying. No, it says God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his only Son. God gave himself because of his love. Choose God's love, because when you choose God's love, you are choosing the one true, trustworthy God in life. Now, I can practically hear some of you whispering to yourselves, "Sure, Pastor, but what about all those people who've chosen God's love and have ended up suffering? What about all those Christians who've died in tragic accidents? What about all those believers who've died painful deaths? Is that what you call love?" Good question. I, too, have asked that question more times than I care to remember. It's important for us to remember that when we choose God's love, God gives us higher purposes in life. God starts widening and deepening and broadening of our vision of what it means to be human beings created in God's image. When we choose God's love, God begins to construct something in us and with us that is new and beautiful. And so, we begin to discover that God's love is a protecting love, but not always a preventing love. We begin to see that God's love is a providing love, but not always a pampering love. We will learn that God's love sometimes is a humbling love, but is never a demeaning love. This, then, is what you and I choose when we choose to believe in God's love or not. There's one other choice that I want to tell you about before I end this morning. You see, God too has freedom of choice. God has the ability to choose who to love. The good news of the Christian faith is that God freely chooses to love each one of us. There's nothing in the rules of the universe that says the Creator has to love our human race. When Adam and Eve made a royal mess of Eden, their Creator could have chosen just as easily to turn his back on the whole mess, write it off, and walk away calling it a bad experiment. In fact, there are some cynics who think that's exactly what happened. But no, God hung in there with Adam and Eve and their descendants. God kept placing people in situations where they could choose between good and evil. Our risking God kept risking getting the reputation of being the God of second and third and fourth choices. In this life, we are confronted with a number of wonderful, scary, life-changing choices in life. Who will you choose for your friends? Who will you choose to marry? What will you make for your vocation in life? Where will you live? What will you do with your retirement? I believe that the most important choice that you can make in life is, what God will you believe in? Will it be a fickle, fleeting, man-made God? Or will it be the one God of creation, the Lord whose divine love is beyond, above, around, and under us always? Someone once said, We are all manufacturers in a way, making good, making trouble, making excuses. Choose God and let God make the best of your life. Just as the needle on the compass swings to the North Pole, so too may you be drawn to believe in the God of love, who is, who was, and who will be, world without end. Amen.